Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am BorderWise and welcome to the From the Depths Detection Guide. At long last I've gotten around to making one of these things. Now detection in From the Depths is, I was about to say a relatively recent thing, but it's not. It was just, it was one of the big updates a long time ago that surprised absolutely everybody and sent a lot of people, myself included, into a flat tailspin. But it's been around for a while, but it's still one of the more, how do you put this? Like, one of the more intricate parts of the game. And so quite a few people have requested me to make a tutorial on it, so here it is. We're covering the basics today. And so detection is basically how your craft see, or sense, or perceive, or basically know where other craft are. Like, enemy craft specifically. Considering the amount of times I've seen my own ships run into each other, they probably are invisible to each other still, and that's annoying. But the first thing I want to mention about detection is that if you go into the options menu, you'll notice there's automatic detection, and on default settings it's set to 0.1. So, no matter what, even if your craft has no detection settings at all, at the very least, it can know that an enemy is there, and it knows very roughly where the enemy is, which means that if you have a craft which doesn't actually need to know precisely where an enemy is, and it has self-guided weaponry, which is basically just missiles, you don't need any detection systems at all. It helps if you have at least one, because then it just kind of knows where they are a little bit better, but for the most part, you only technically need detection systems, or at the very least accurate detection systems, in order to aim at an enemy. So, there's that, and you can override this. Just if you're building a craft in the designer and you don't want to mess around with detection at the time, you can set this to 1. It means your craft will, kind of in the old-fashioned way, just detect each other. Yeah, detect each other? Yeah, well, just spot each other in the way the craft did before the detection update happened. So, we're going to stick it like that for now, because personally, when I'm building things, I always leave automatic detection at 0.1, and I always design, I always implement my detection systems at the same time as the things that need them, simply because it stops you having to, like, rebuild your craft slightly when it turns out you do need a lot of detection. So, let's go over the bits. So, there are multiple overlapping categories of detection, and so there's kind of two separate categories in which there's the kind of detector, as in the kind of medium. Is medium the right word? Well, the kind of signal that the sensor is working off, and there's also, what is the word here? Like, its job. So it's basically, it's the job. There's the function of the detector, and the, like, how it detects stuff. Yeah, that makes sense. And so to start off with, what you have first are detectors themselves, and they are just a 90 degree or 360 degree, or in the case of the wireless Snooper, like, I don't know, 720 degree thing. I'm not sure if it's 720 degrees, by the way. It's just a thing that spots an enemy craft in, like, a certain, just whether it's above water or below it. They are the thing that see it. And so that's things like radars and cameras and sonars and all that kind of stuff. Those are, and infrared cameras and that kind of thing. And then you have passive detection, which cannot just spot enemy craft. They detect something specific on it. So the example of that is like over here, and I've just laid these bits out so you can see them all arrayed out. They're not actually connected, so they're not currently functional. So it's things that, why do I have two freaking telescopes? That's very silly of me. What am I talking about? So it's things like retroreflection sensors and passive sonars, passive radars, and stuff like that. They don't detect enemy craft, they detect something specific about them. So, for instance, the retroreflection sensor detects cameras. So, this unit will constantly rotate and search for targets using a laser that can pass through glass optics but not be detected by color camera sensors. The laser will find optical components such as a wireless camera, camera 90 degrees, camera 360 degrees, and camera gimbal tracker, and provide accurate detections on them. And so this thing spots only other cameras, and if the craft you're looking at doesn't have any form of camera detection, so these things, so the 360, the visual, and what was the other thing? I forgot what it was. And gimbal tracker, so where are you freaking muggins? Oh, I'm rebuilding my thing, I mean, this thing. So, all the visual stuff, that's what that spots. And, yeah. But things like passive radars detect active radars, so the 360, the 90, the tracker, and it also detects, I wonder if it actually says it. It also can detect radar missile buoys and active radar seekers, so this is quite handy as a supplement to munition warners to detect enemy missiles coming in. And same with passive sonar, except beneath the water. This thing listens out and can hear sonar components and acoustic torpedoes. So basically any sonar-guided torpedoes this thing can spot. And if those kind of things, if those specific things are not around, if an enemy craft doesn't have them or isn't firing them, these things can't actually see anything. These can't see enemy craft just if they're sitting there. Okay, so that's active detection, passive detection, and then you have trackers. So there's at least one in pretty much every category except for sonar, I just noticed. Sometimes multiple. So these are basically the things that once you've already detected something, these things lock onto it and provide a much better tracking information, like more precise measurements of where the craft actually is and like how it's moving. So, on that note, so it's things like the radar gimbal, the IR camera gimbal tracker, the visual, the camera gimbal tracker, the telescope. The telescope and the camera are pretty much the same thing, except the telescope is twice as tall, and I think, yeah, that's the only real difference. Like, I guess this is mostly just an aesthetic thing, really, for those of you who want to make Age of Sail ships. But in any case, so, on that note, you go here, if you hit Q on any detection component, you will bring up this menu right here. So what this is setting, like, how your craft calculates, or how each individual mainframe, because you can set this separately for every individual mainframe on your craft, like, what it does with the information it receives. So over here is basically prioritizing which detection component is kind of, in a way, trusted the most. So if we hit auto adjust there, you'll see that there's a lot of different things, and basically it's there's three things here. So you've got bearing, you've got range, you've got speed. Bearing is like which direction a craft is moving in. So whether it's moving left, right, forwards, backwards, up or down. And range is how far away it is, and speed is how fast it's going. And these numbers here, when you mess around, is the time that your detection systems will calculate, or your mainframe will calculate, the average of all these numbers. So if the bearing is set to 3, which are the automatic... this auto-adjust thing works for most weapons, by the way. It's really only for lasers and very fast APS shells that you need to set it much lower. Because if you set it too high, like, things get terrible. But basically, when you set this, it's like this bearing is over 3 seconds, so it averages the bearing of whatever it's looking at over the last 3 seconds in order to get an accurate prediction, if you will, of where an enemy craft is going. It's the same for range, and it's the same for speed. So if a craft is constantly jerking around, so like if it's constantly moving up and down or left or right, this thing will average that out and try and predict where it's going to head next. Same for range. If it's constantly moving back and forth, like between like closer and then further away again, this will be averaged out. And with the speed, if the thing is constantly speeding up and slowing down, it'll be the average speed of the enemy craft over whatever time this is. In this case, it's 5 seconds. And 4 more janky stuff, so if you say the bearing, for instance, something that's really janky and like bouncing around a lot, you might want to set this a little bit higher, so it can be average and it can average out and actually hit the thing. And same with range, like that. And like that's usually with stuff that I don't know. So what's it? The speed is the main thing here, because it says right there on screen, higher numbers can ignore fast oscillations that target motion, but will not recover well after an enemy turns, because, like, it'll average out. If an enemy turns, its speed changes, and the direction in which it's going changes as well, because this speed will always be leading the target, and it'll be always thinking about 5 seconds in the future. So, yeah, this auto-adjust thing usually does the trick. Wow, I went actually off script there for quite a while. So, I didn't actually finish going over the detection. So, these, all these things, there's multiple kinds of detection. So, let's just go over this. So, from left to right. So, first you have radar, and radar is kind of the most basic form of detection, I feel. So, if you read here, it's just, it'll detect any constructible within line of sight and within radar range. It won't detect targets underwater or operate while submerged. And radar range depends on the size of the target above the water and the drag cross-section. So, radar has an easier time spotting large targets and targets which are big. So, these are, I don't know, radar isn't the best form of detection system. You tend to find that visual cameras tend to do a much better job. But they can be used, and they use slightly less detection power, which is the other thing. If you go into your AI and go into, no, that's not it, MIS cards, you need general purpose processing cards in order to actually fuel or power your detection systems. And so if you go over here, this card over here, this AI setup over here is a lot. Hover over them, you can see the total processing power of this mainframe and all the bits connected to it is about 18. It's got 11 detectors attached to it, which are all up on this mast thing right here. So, and it needs 15 general purpose processing power, and it's got 18, so that's enough. So you need to have enough general purpose processing power in order to have your detection systems run at full efficiency. And that becomes important because I believe that radar uses less than other systems. So what we've got here is this thing requires 1.5 units of general processing power compared to a sonar 360, 2 units, and 2.5 units. So radar is the cheapest when it comes to general purpose processing power, but it's kind of just generally bad at detecting things. Because all detection systems have error, so none of them are 100% accurate. So the error in the bearing to the target is 2 degrees, which is pretty terrible because it means that whenever our 360 radar calculates bearing, it'll always be about 2 degrees off from where it actually is, which is annoying because it means that any weapon that's using this radar to detect things will be 2 degrees off as well. The range error is a little bit better, it's 0.4%, and creates a detection 10 times per second. So this thing gets updated once every 10th of a second. And it also has a relative detection range of 0.5, which is, let's see if that's any better. Yeah, so not great. The trackers tend to have a much longer detection range. So that's radar, good for big things. Then you have sonar, which is very similar to radar, except it's below the water. In fact, most detection systems do not function below water. I think the only things that do are the retroreflection sensor, the laser rangefinder, and the various sonar bits, including the sonar buoy over here. More on that later. And it's pretty much just for spotting things below water, and it's not great detection information. Like, let's compare the two. So, to the radar, it's got slightly better bearing, it's got really terrible range. So the range error is, well, it's not really terrible, but it's pretty bad. It's 0.75%. Compare that to the 0.4%, it's actually not that much worse at all. It creates a detection 5 times per second, so it's like think of it as the sonar pinging 5 times per second in order to get a sonar reading of whatever's in the water. So yeah, that's pretty much just for below water. IR cameras are next, and these are also pretty terrible. So you'll notice that the angular area in the bearing is 0.8 compared to the 2 degrees there, so it's got better bearing than 360 radar. And range error is 12.5%, which is pretty awful. It's pretty bad. It takes the detection 10 times per second, so it's the same as the 360 radar, and takes 2 processing power. Compared to the 90 degree ones, it's let me see, it's 1.315, 0.5, 0.5, 10, and then 0.4, 10, and 30. So we're, particularly with the IR cameras, they just detect many times per second, so they've got more up-to-date detection information. And they tend to, for one thing, they're stealthy, so there's no kind of passive detection that can spot IR cameras. Like passive radars can detect radars, passive sonars can detect sonar, and retroreflection sensors can spot any kind of visual thing. But IR cameras are very sneaky, they cannot be detected. So, if you want to create a stealthy thing, like a stealth ship, like you can just make the hull out of alloy, so radar has a hard time spotting it, have a very low profile, so it's harder for cameras to see it. And then, like, you can use IR cameras. So, IR cameras are stealthy, which is why I tend not to use them that much. Because, well, yeah, it's like stealth isn't that useful in front of the depths unless you're making a submarine or a spacecraft. But yeah, so that's Team Stealth over there, and then we get to the visual stuff, which is the stuff I use the most, because it's just most useful. So you see over here, error in the bearing 2 degrees over here, 360 camera 0.8 degrees, which is, I think, the best out of all of these so far, 360 trackers. The range error is 12.5%, which is not good, they're terrible at detecting range. Created detection 15 times per second, so more than a 360 radar and more than IR camera. And yeah, so the cameras are where it's at really, because cameras are very good because bearing is probably one of the most important detection settings to think about, because which direction a craft is going is really important for landing any kind of shell on it. So with APS and especially crams, bearing is vital. Like, the range error is kind of like, given how much you tend to shoot at things anyway, you can over or undershoot, and you'll probably still hit the thing. But if you shoot in the, like, if your predictive shots go in the wrong direction, you tend to miss a lot. So bearing is very important. And they have really good bearing, so the camera and telescope, well, the camera gimbal and telescope, 0.05 degrees bearing error, which is fantastic. Absolutely fan-dabby-dozy. The radar gimbal tracker, by the way, has probably got the best range of anything. Well, actually no, the laser rangefinder tracker, which is... I think this is also a visual thing. It can be spotted by... no, it doesn't get spotted by the retroreflection sensor. So again, this is also a stealthy thing. So this is a pretty good tracker actually. The best range error is the laser rangefinder tracker. The radar gimbal is not very far behind. The problem is with this, the laser rangefinder, you can see right at the bottom of the tooltip, it can be obscured by smoke. So that's one use for smoke shells, is that if any craft you're firing at uses laser rangefinders, it can get blinded by smoke. So that's something to keep in mind right there. And it's why I hardly ever use these things, really. I might have one, but for the most part, if you want really good range estimates, you're better off using a radar gimbal tracker. Or coincidence rangefinders. Except, never mind, because they're pretty terrible. So, yeah, so... moving on. Laser rangefinder we talked about. Very good, what was it? Range information? I literally forgot what I just said. And then over here we have the retroreflection sensor. We've kind of already covered that already. It spots out the cameras. And then we have the wireless snooper, which is a weird thing. It's kind of in a category all of its own. It actually falls outside all the categories on this because it's a passive sensor, and the one thing it detects is a wireless transmission. So if we go up to our mainframe, way over here, you'll see that it has a wireless transmitter on it. This wireless transmitter sends wireless signals to anything that has a wireless receiver on it. So we go here, and wireless receiver. This block is connected, and there's a signal being transmitted over here, and it talks. The wireless snooper detects that, and so the more wireless receivers on an enemy craft, the more accurate this will be. So, the probability of detection is based on the distance that the enemy wireless receivers need to transmit to reach all of their receivers. So, with a large craft with lots of wireless receivers on them, wireless snoopers have an easier time spotting them as opposed to anything else. Which is why, while we're talking about stealth, if you want a super stealthy craft, the recipe basically is do not use any form of wireless receiver. Use infrared cameras if you're operating above water. And just use passive detection. Because all passive detection, by the way, cannot be detected by like any form of tracker. So, like passive radars can't detect each other, passive sonars can't detect each other, and yeah, retroreflection sensors can't detect each other either. So that's important to note. And then you just make your craft out of rubber or something. So that's all very good. I've gotten off script again. Well, no, here we are again. So, Quintus and rangefinders are a bit of a fun thing as well. They're visual, so they can see through glass blocks. So, despite the name, these things are really good for bearing. And these things actually... Let me see. They're not quite as good as the gimbal camera and the gimbal telescope trackers in terms of bearing accuracy, because there's 0.05 degrees, and the smallest rangefinder, well, all of these are 0.1. But their range, I don't know. These things are weird because in practice I find that they're actually very good, but in the tooltip they're just not as good, really. I don't know. I think mainly these things are used visual convergence to its opposite ends. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. These things I tend to find work really well. But even though, to look at their bearing range estimates, they're really bad, and they detect very slowly. They are very quite good on the processing power front. All of these things only require one processing power, as opposed to this, which requires 1.5. As opposed to this, whoa. Yeah, the laser rangefinder actually is the best over here. It requires 0.1 units of general processing power. That's amazing. Mostly I use these rangefinders because they look cool and they've got armor on them, so... There's probably some other reason to use them, but I can't think of what it is. This has got the best health and armor of pretty much any detection equipment. It's also super heavy. Great for sticking on turrets. And lastly, what we've got here is the Boies. The Boies are in town. So, we've got the sonar boy and the radar boy. They basically do the same thing, because they go on a missile. So, if we have a missile here, like so, and we just do this. So we go here, you'll see, where is it? Radar boy and sonar boy. The boys! Where is it? Hello? Hello? Did I go blind again? I might have gone... Interesting. I cannot seem to put that on the small missile. There we go. Radar boy. So these things are like 360 radars and sonars that you mount on a missile, and you lob it up. And you can just see like that. So, where these things are helpful, actually, let's do this. Let's do this, and then this, so you can see them more clearly. That's the radar. Here is the sonar. And that's nice. I did that backwards. So, where these are useful is that if you have anything that flies and that you potentially want to fire at things in the water, like, say, a sub-hunting aircraft, or just an airship that can shoot ships that are currently sinking, you're gonna need a sonar buoy just to be able to detect anything that's in water, because if you're flying, you're not dragging your bum in the water and can't mount a regular sonar on it. The opposite is true for things like submarines. Radar buoys are needed if you don't want to have a wee periscope sticking a radar up out of the water, which can be shot at or detected. So yeah, so that's where these two things are most useful. Back in the day, for those of you who've picked up From the Depths relatively recently, these things used to be what were used as countermeasures. So if you wanted to distract radar guided missiles or sonar guided torpedoes, you'd need to stick these things on. And by the way, in order to launch one of these things, you need a buoy holder. Because for some reason, you just need to have these attached to a mainframe, and then you can lob these. I'll give you an example, actually. So if we do this, if I try and fire this missile controller, well, yeah, you don't actually need to connect them, but they can't detect anything unless they're connected to a mainframe. And this is hilarious. They're just bouncing in place. Boing, 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 boing. So yeah, you can still kind of use them as decoys, but you're better off just using radar target process. So you see this max radar simulated signal strength is about 1250. It's about twice as powerful if you just use a radar target simulator. So actually, you could be very clever and like combine the two and do something like. Where's it? There. You can do something like this. And double whammy, you've got detection and a decoy. That's useful. So anyway, that's the basic detection systems and what they all do. And considering what you need, I've already kind of talked on that a little bit, but it's generally best to have a variety because they all have their different strengths and weaknesses. So radar is the best at a range apart from the laser rangefinder. The sonar is what's needed for detecting things below the water. IR is stealthy. Cameras are just the best with bearing. Passive trackers are needed to get accurate detection information. And like, it's always good to have like at least one 360 detector, be it radar or camera above water. And then a whole bunch of 90-degree ones specifically pointing various directions, mounted on turrets, potentially. Then a whole mess of trackers. You actually want more trackers than anything else, because your overall detection information can be muddied by stuff which doesn't provide good information. So basically you want the average information here, all of this adding up, to be the best it can be, to be the most accurate it can be with the lowest kind of error. So yeah, so pretty much in order of importance, ascending, you want 360 detection, 90-degree detection, and trackers. Okay? So these things count as trackers, and the buoys also count as 360 detection, so that makes sense. And also a thing to note is that different kinds of detection can be hidden and squirreled away in different ways. So, and it's all to do with their size. So you'll notice the IR cameras are a little bit big. This is one of the reasons I never use them, is because the IR camera is twice as long as an active radar or a visual camera. And the way they connect is also different. So, a 90-degree radar can be connected to things. Well, let's demonstrate that over here. So we go over here, we replace this here, and go here, and then here. One of the advantages that 90-degree radars have is that you can stick them like anywhere you like. It's all connected, and it connects on 5 of its sides, and you can do that. Compare that to the 90-degree camera. It only connects on one side. So you can connect it like that. That doesn't work. Nope, that doesn't work either. And nope, that's the only thing that works. Same here. This connects on 5 sides. Very convenient. And the telescope, by the way, is a little bit weird because it can poke up out of a hole quite nicely. So you can do something like this and cover it. And yeah, you can do something like that. And what else? Kind of at the end of my crib notes, by the way, so I'm just making stuff up now. One of the most important things, and this is just one of the tricks with detection, is protecting them. So, with that, I'm going to pull up a craft. No, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to pull up a craft, which I consider does a very good job of this. So where's it? Something that hardly ever gets blinded. I'm gonna well, the tier. Why not? Why not the tier? So, the main thing for keeping your detection safe, because you need to, if your craft is blinded, it cannot aim at a target, is to spread it out as much as possible. So, you'll notice here on the tier that it has detection spread out all over. It's got detection on the turrets, like here, there, the main guns. Stick detection on your main guns is a double-edged sword, because you can create weak spots on it by doing that, but it can also ensure that things like 90-degree trackers are always pointed at whatever they're shooting at, which is very convenient. See these little Sea-Whiz guns? They've got passive radars on them because that's their job, to shoot down incoming missiles, so it's good to stick them there. And it's got this rotatey thing up here, 360 camera. This is a little bit cheaty, by the way, because if you put a detection on spin blocks, be it a turret or a regular spin block like this, it can see straight through the hull. So you see this radar isn't blocked. Whereas if I do something like this, so radar and this now, you'll see that the line of sight backwards out of the vehicle is blocked. That's because this superstructure, this mast, is in the way. And so you'll notice that this radar isn't blocked at all. So that is kind of an exploit and kind of... yeah, it's an exploit. Let's just call it what it is. Because this radar can see straight through this mast, which is a wee bit cheaty. But that's kind of just how the game is coded these days. And up here, you'll see that we have more detection. We've got all this tracker, like, quite nicely hidden up here. With the munition water right in the middle. And coincidence, rangefinders and all that. And sticking your trackers on a turret. Oh my god, that's a lot of stuff. It's actually a pretty good strategy, because you're ensuring that your tracker's always pointing at a target. You just got to make sure that they're defended properly. And the tier has stuff spread out all over the place. So this is the main two defenses to keep your detection safe, is to spread it out. So along most of its length, the tier has its detection squirreled away all around the place. And the other thing is to mount it on superstructure. So, back in the day, and I'm going to summon forth one of my old designs, just as an example. Giant craft, god, this is a huge thing. Yes, the Scylla, we haven't seen you in a while ago. Back in the day, I was actually rather notorious for... Jeez, you're bigger than I remember. Can you not? Thank you. So, back in the day, I didn't use superstructure because I thought it wasn't needed. And that was silly of me, because it is kind of needed, because what you've got here is I've stuck detectors, separate ones, on pretty much every single turret, which means the amount of detection power that this thing needs is a lot. So we go down here, and you'll just see like this, like the entire middle of the craft is just filled with general purpose processing cards. And this is very expensive and very wasteful. Each one of these puppies costs 100 materials. And so, that's quite inefficient, really. And the reason I did that was just so this thing is hard to blind, because if every single turret has detectors on it, you need to destroy all the turrets before the thing actually is blinded. And that's not a good idea, because it just means you've got a whole bunch of redundant detectors, and it's smarter, generally, just to secure them away properly. So, here's a far more recent design of mine, which doesn't have a name yet. It's just called the Big Superstructure Hull. Probably doesn't have a name, but ye gods, like, this is one of my better looking craft. note the mimics on the secondary guns. So this is kind of more a better system of detection, because you've got these armored coincidence rangefinders on the turrets, and they're nicely covered by pleak panels, just for explosion proofing. And they're on the turret, so they can always point at the target. And then you have this armored mast here. So this is where cameras are useful. So you'll see in here is a laser rangefinder, a retroreflection detector, and a visual camera, a 360. But it's completely covered. This is something that I'm so sorry that I don't remember the name of who told me this, but you can use portholes to cover up your cameras. So, in the actual build menu, it says here that cameras can see through glass blocks. Now, you might think, oh, okay, like I can just armor them in glass then. Glass is not armor. Glass is kind of only useful for decoration, really, because it's see-through, yes, and your cameras can see through it, but its health and armor is absolutely abysmal. A single glass block is weaker than a wood block, so 60 health, 1 armor. A wooden block is 180 health, 3 armor. So you would arguably be better off armoring your cameras with wood. However, when you have a porthole, which is like a handy armored hole, this thing is got good stats. It's 350 health and armor 15 for a metal porthole. An alloy porthole is 260 health and 13 armor, and is a lot lighter. So basically they have the same stats as a metal or an alloy block. In fact, 350, 350, 15, 350, 15. They have exactly the same stats. So this is a godsend. It is, honest to goodness, a real game changer for using detection, because it means that since you probably are going to be relying on cameras a lot anyway, I forgot about that rangefinder in the middle, you can cover up your cameras as thickly as you like, because it doesn't matter how many portholes you put between your little camera and the outside world. Look at that. It can still see just fine. And you can actually go slightly mad with this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like, there is now 10 meters, the equivalent of 10 metal blocks between that 360 camera and anything that wants to hit it from the side. So it's, it is really, like, really powerful, and please, from the devs, if you're watching this, please don't change that. Like, you'll make me so happy if you leave that the way it is, because detection systems are just so fragile. It's like, they're not, I don't know, they're not really delicate, but what they're attached to is often really delicate. So let's go over, oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. So, we go over that. Let's have a look at the 90-degree radar. 315 is okay. It's not bad, but not exactly durable. Like, timed explosive shells and timed fragment shells have a habit of ripping detection straight off, and also these things are vulnerable to EMP, by the way. So the other thing, so what do we got? We've got spreading them out, we've got superstructure, we've got armoring them with portholes. These things are also very important. Surge protectors. So you ideally want to hide these a little bit away from your detector so they pull EMP surges away from them. In fact, let's pull up big superstructure hull again, because I believe I did this with that. So we go over here. So you'll see the detection's up there, that precious wireless receiver's up there, and this is a slight overkill, by the way. You probably don't need this many surge protectors, but you've got them here right in the middle so that if, say, an EMP missile hits right here, the surge is pulled down and around and away from your detection and just goes, like, somewhere in here and gets drained away. And I tend to find that surge protectors work a lot better than trying to armor your detection systems in non-conductive material. I used to try and just, like, hide wood around them, because, like, you know, wood doesn't conduct EMP very well. EMP susceptibility 0%, protective range 100 damage units. Okay, that sounds good, as opposed to metal, which is EMP. Where is it? Doesn't have EMP stats showing here. That's annoying. Basically, EMP just rolls straight through this. And staying with stone is that EMP susceptibility is 0%. These things weaken EMP quite a lot, but big EMP surges can still pass through them, and also they're delicate. So go here, wooden block, 183, metal, aka the portholes, 350-15. So if you try and EMP proof your radars on your superstructure with wood or stone, you're just kind of weakening the structure. I tend to find it's better to use either metal to construct your superstructure and armor up your your detectors, or if you're worried about keeping your center of mass down, use alloy instead, because it's only a little bit weaker and it's a lot lighter. So that is basically it for detection. I surprisingly actually managed to talk about more than I thought, and yeah, there's probably stuff I've missed, and I apologize if I've missed it, but that's the gist of it. Basically, yeah, you have a variety of detection. Make sure that you tweak your detectors correctly. So lasers would have detection would look something like this because they're hit scan. Crams and APS, this usually works, and if it doesn't work, you just kind of tweak it so that you get it predicting whatever target you want. Whatever the movement of your target is, you just gotta tweak this so that it predicts it properly. So. Sorry for no explosions this time. I can just quickly fix that, like right now. There we go. Yay! That felt fun. Okay, so go forth and stick radars on everything. Or no, stick cameras on everything. Stick portholes on everything. And use surge protectors. Your electricity bill and electrician will thank you. So, on that note, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Support me on Patreon if you like, it really helps. Thank you to all my current Patreon supporters, and I will see you next time in From the Depths. Farewell!